Ladies and gentlemen, I think this is going to be a fitting finale to what has been hectic weeks and months of work on the annual report on city systems. And now some of the brains of the report are here with us, as well as people who make policy, people who are enlightened citizens like Vidya, Shah and Mr. Shisodia. So I think we have a great combination of people to speak about the issues relating to city systems. Let me start with the person closest to policy making, Mr. Subrahmanyam. Mr. Subrahmanyam, as the head of the NITI Aayog, you all have given a lot of thought to urbanization. It's one of the verticals in the NITI Aayog activities itself in the website. You have spoken, and I've Googled your work on growth hubs for 20 cities and how you want to develop it. If you can give us some more details on how you want to see it evolve. Growth hubs of certain cities.
Yeah, thank you, Latha. I've not spoken much about urbanization so far. So in fact, I will be speaking at length for the first time today. Oh. So in a way, you're getting the curtain raiser. It's just that I made a passing remark. I think there's a seminar by WRI. We are an increasingly urbanizing nation. The percentages may look low, 30-odd%, but 30-odd% in absolute numbers is still pretty large. I mean, we have more than 10% of the world's urban population. And the projections you heard from the minister a little while ago, by 2047, and we use the word 2047 because it's 100 years, so it's kind of easy to remember, we'll be touching 50%. So 50% of our population is going to be urban. That's phenomenal. And you can see, you've heard the challenges, you've heard the things being done by the ministry. We in NITI actually started looking at it from a slightly different perspective. We felt that urban spaces are being left to city planners and nobody else. People are almost looking at urbanization as an autonomous process, taking it as given, and then planning for what is going to happen. Now, well, that's one way of approaching a problem, but when you have a child and you let the child grow, one is leaving the child autonomously to grow the way they want, which means they'll never go to school, they'll never go to college. The other is, parents do guide them in certain ways. The question is, cities are too important entities, extremely important entities, to be abandoned to autonomous processes. And actually when you went around, and I think we did that for a couple of months. I mean, one of the first things I did when I took over was actually, we had this urbanization vertical. I have my colleague sitting with me here, saying that, look, okay, you're doing this, they're doing a lot of projects, but what is it that makes cities different? And then you realize, study all the big cities in the world. All of them have economic plans. Be it New York, be it London, Tokyo, Seoul, Dubai, everybody has a big economic plan. It could be cultural, it could be financial, it could be industrial, whatever way. And then you suddenly realize not a single Indian city has an economic plan. And even the master plans you're talking of are actually city master plans in terms of an urban planner's perspective. So we said, okay, do we plan for cities or we just leave them to autonomous processes? And a good example is Calcutta, a city which was the #1 city or the second city of the empire, today doesn't count even among your top 3 or 4 cities for a variety of reasons in terms of at least economic growth. Is that going to be the fate of Mumbai? Is that the fate of Bangalore? Will all these infrastructure things which you're going to do in cities going to keep them going or going to keep them going the way we would like them to be? The second question that stares at all of us is, India is growing. It's bound to grow if you do the right things and going to go fast. It's doing fast, 6.5%, probably will touch 8% if you do a few more things, few more reforms. That means this country is headed to be, you've heard the number 8 billion or so by 2030. By all estimates, even a base case scenario, we're going to be a $30 trillion economy by 2047. $30 trillion is larger than the United States today, just to get an idea of the magnitude. And then you realize, where is this all going to come from? 60, 70, 80% of the incremental stuff is going to come from cities. It's not going to be agriculture, it's not going to be rural India. It is going to be urban. That means out of that $30 trillion, 26, 27 trillion is going to be urban. It doesn't mean agriculture won't grow. It'll grow from something like $500 billion today to about 2 trillion. But it's the cities which are going to contribute. And if cities have to contribute, you have to plan them as economic drivers. And I think that's how we have started this Growth Hub program. We are looking at cities. We have begun with 4 cities, taking them. We go through a 5-step process. Do a diagnostic of the city, the economic basis, the infrastructural thing, and the sustainability thing. And then do a aspirational vision kind of a thing for the city. Where do you want to be? On the economic front, on the sustainability front, and the infrastructural front. Then do a SWOT analysis. Okay, what is it that makes this city go? And also, what can make the city go? I think that's very important. We often are stuck with, Bangalore is at IT. Why can't Bangalore be, the cinema capital of India? There's a way of looking at things, So don't get stuck with existing growth drivers. Do a SWOT analysis, identify growth drivers, either existing or new ones. Try to scale them up, 5x, 10x. And then plan the rest of the urban planning to meet those economic objectives. Be it housing, be it infrastructure, be it open spaces, be it universities. All world-class cities have world-class universities. Which Indian city can claim to have world-class cities? I'll take the example of Mumbai. We are doing 4 cities: Mumbai, Varanasi, Vizag, and Surat. They're tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. So when we expand it, we can use the template to go it. And we're working with partners. NITI has very limited skills, so we're partnering with anybody who's coming along with some expertise and to see how it can be done. We're doing it with WRI, we're doing it with ISEC. Bombay is about $150 billion today. So if India is going to go from $3 trillion to $30 trillion, Mumbai is going to go from 150 billion to 1.5 trillion. So Mumbai in 2047 is going to be half the size of India today. If you don't plan for it, it will not reach there. And let me tell you, neighbors of Mumbai are planning for it. So Mumbai also needs to plan if it has to be on a trajectory. And I think that's what we are doing. Hopefully, we will have some results out by December, the first slot. Once we have some template in place on how this thing can be done, then we will probably expand it to other cities. Maybe pick up 20-odd cities in the country. Every city would need it. Chennai, Bangalore, Kolkata, Delhi. There are complexities. And then the biggest and most complex part is the end. Okay, after you have projectized them or identified what needs to be done, what are your implementation structures which are there? All the problems with municipalities, MMRDAs, all that stuff, we'll handle that.
That sounds really interesting and exhausting and inspiring. So, I want to come back with more questions, but let me get first thoughts from the other members in the panel. Mr. Shisodia, let me ask you about, since you all are inspired to set up Rainmatter, I wanted to ask you, Bangalore became the center for Zerodha because of the peculiar skills or the specific skills of that city. Have you now reached a stage in Bangalore where you think it is becoming a deterrent to growth of, such brainy schemes like Zerodha? Are you getting worried that the city is actually becoming counterproductive?
That's actually true in many ways. I know a lot of people personally who are making the choice to not be in Bangalore anymore. And I think the larger question is, are we satisfied with a dozen cities that are considered economic engines that lead the way, or in a city or in a country of 6.5 lakh villages, 30,000 clusters? Do we want to see 1,000 such options? A 20-year-old today has maybe a dozen options at best. Right? So can we expand this built on natural strengths that various geographies have, various places have, and for which we need to understand those places for what they are and what they represent. Right? There are cities which lead culturally, economically. There are various factors which actually make a city what it is.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think we need to expand our imagination. It's not that India will move to these dozen clusters. Can we imagine a 20-year-old, 20 years from now, having 10,000 options in India?
Well, I don't think there are so many options. And I take your point that cities will have to have even cultural and, sociological attractions to grow. And it just can't be a university town or a town with perhaps a port town. It just has to have that many-dimensional growth to be able to be a truly a growth center. And on that point, Vidya, actually something similar. Since you're from EdelGive and centered in the same city as me, in Mumbai, actually I want to ask you the same question. Does it frustrate you that Mumbai may be taken over, that other cities might outstrip, simply because the planning has not been what it should be, that demands on that city are too many, even if a lot has been invested in transport? Does it ever frustrate you in terms of growth? And do you often see people arguing that they would rather grow and expand in other cities?
I think Mumbai is in quite a similar situation as Bangalore today. And it's not the fear that other cities will overtake, largely because, I apply a sort of a development lens to almost everything we do at the foundation. And ultimately what citizens expect and want, or what even governments and states want, is to provide equitable living standards to its people. I very much doubt that our largest cities or our large cities truly do that. And to that extent, if there are other cities that emerge and come with the kind of planning and the kind of, let's call it enlightenment around building cities to provide these equitable living standards, perhaps that is a solution to get cities like Mumbai and Bangalore to actually wake up and smell the coffee, as it were. So I think, in a sense, we would love many more model cities to spring up. The other thing, I think, having known Janaagraha since 2010 and watched so closely its amazing growth in being at the center of building and nurturing the idea of building city systems, is this whole idea of citizenship, which we haven't spoken much about today. Yes. And I think one of the things as a citizen and as a person who resides in Mumbai is the consciousness that something that, being associated with Janaagraha has actually given me, is the role of us as citizens.
Yes.
And the fact that what states do through policy is actually build so much control over our lives. How we live, where we live, how we commute, where we work, what we eat, almost all of it is determined today by the state through policy action. And if we as citizens the one job we need to do is to elect leaders who have this standard of providing equity to all its citizens. And if we don't even elect those kinds of leaders, then we're failing as citizens as well. And therefore, if the state of Mumbai is to be deplored, we can't necessarily rest the blame only on us, on leaders. We have to also rest the blame on ourselves.
No, actually, I would go beyond that. I would think that citizens' committees, the Janaagraha report, the annual report, is very eloquent in terms of, the failings of government. But I guess ward committees would be created if citizens brought pressure. Have there been enough citizen groups? Have there been enough Janaagrahas in the first place in other cities? It's a fair question. It's not just election. I would think that to believe that we would be over if we elected good leaders is, reducing the role of the citizen. What we really need in urban bodies is much more citizen participation across from the ward upwards. But okay, let me not be a panelist. Let me be the interrogator. Srikanth, actually, I have been asking them where have their cities been overtaken by others and what do they bemoan. Let me turn it into something optimistic. Since you have, I guess, the widest knowledge on city systems, their achievements and their failures, why don't you start by telling us at least 3 shining examples of where you have seen in these last 10 years of annual reports, where cities have pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, even if you want to give us minor examples.
Okay, let me take a step back and tell you why it's difficult to answer that question.
Oh, okay.
So, Vidya referred to city systems, and that's also part of the name of the report. At the heart of that belief, in some ways it is getting proven and becoming more than a belief, is the idea that you can't fix quality of life by fixing quality of life. You can fix quality of life by fixing quality of city systems. The fact that urban poverty, housing, water supply, sewerage and sanitation, transport, etc., are symptoms. But there are underlying root causes. And we call those root causes city systems. In general parlance, you can call them urban governance. But we feel they are interlinked and interdependent, and therefore we choose to call them city systems. And there are 4 in number: urban planning and design, urban capacities and resources, which deals with administrative capacities, empowered mayors and councils, and transparency and citizen participation. We believe that in cities in the world that have delivered great quality of life over a long period of time, they've taken the effort to establish robust city systems. In our earlier editions, we used to compare India's cities with Johannesburg, New York, and London, etc., to demonstrate this. And the idea of the report is really not to find fault with the government, because we have to bear in mind that in the 19th century, New York and London were not shining examples of quality of life. But we don't have to make the same mistakes that they made in the 19th century. Which means we need a two-tracked approach of saying, even as you fix service delivery through projects, we have to fix institutions through reforms. So that's one point that I want to make. The reason I'm saying it's difficult to answer that question is in the Indian context. Because we first became a country, then we had states, and then elected local self-governments were a distant afterthought. Close to 50 years later, that has been our journey. There's nothing, you can't really blame anyone or anything for it. That has been our journey. Some of these are matters of path dependence. It has so happened that a lot of the functions with respect to urban governance have remained with state governments. Yes, it is true that it has taken us inordinately long to build up our institutions of local self-governance, but there have been, challenges around that. State capacities being one of them, the fact that we don't have enough people in government to actually strengthen institutions of local self-government, and so on. And then we have fragmentation of governance of cities. We don't govern our cities as places and people. We govern them as an aggregation of civic service delivery. So there are examples of standalone reforms which have been undertaken. Some of them we've listed in the report. And we'd be conflicted in calling out some of these examples because they're all examples where we've been involved, but there are others as well. To give you a few examples, Odisha, for example, has been a state which has done phenomenally well with respect to empowering urban poor communities, including women. And through their Jaga mission and allocating municipal budgets for the urban poor communities and so on. Similarly, I would call out, you referred to tender share in the conversation with the minister, I'd call out government of Karnataka and Bangalore as one of the examples where a constructive partnership between governments and civil society resulted in a transformative idea. So today Bangalore has one of the most walkable city centers in India, and that idea is getting scaled up in 20 other cities in 5 states, done by our sister organization, Jana Urban Space Foundation. So these are a couple of examples, but the minister spoke about Indore. It's another example. It's a city with a mayor who has a 5-year tenure. So there presumably would have been a constructive partnership.
Indore is definitely an outstanding example. And perhaps we could put Surat there. Confronted with the plague, Surat really rose to the challenge, and thereafter it has been another city altogether.
And just to add to what Samir said, the news media, we often hear about large cities in the news media. Perhaps there are shining examples. Like I remember hearing about the solid waste management story in Ambikapur in Chhattisgarh. But I read about it only because we did a deliberate effort to look out for best practices. But there are smaller cities which are doing terrific work in some of these areas. We may not have heard about them as much, so a lot more work needs to be done to uncover them and nurture those beacons.
Fair point. I think you also mentioned that in Thiruvananthapuram, they've shown some excellent examples of involving the city in the state planning. To come to that.
To add a point actually to both my previous speakers. You see, what was the demography of India at the time of independence? We were hardly urban. I wouldn't know the numbers, but probably less than 10%. So the governance structures that were designed then were suited for the India of that time. So I won't even blame anybody for not having attended to urban issues. So far more attention was given to rural issues. Even Mahatma Gandhi talked about village self-governance and all that. Nobody talked about urban self-governance. For natural reason. It's now that it is coming to the forefront. Cities have become larger. And which were the cities which had some urban governance? It was the old British presidency cities. I mean, Delhi wasn't one, so it's still a difficult area as far as that is concerned. It was Mumbai, Chennai and Calcutta. So, and others imitated them. But if you go to a state like Bihar, which is less than 10% urbanization, I mean, it's not at the top of recall doing urban reform and urban governance reform. But as the nature of the polity changes, the nature of demography changes, I think these urban reforms will come in, governance reforms or urban structural reforms or systems as you're calling. through public pressure. And there is no doubt about it. You can see things happening in Tamil Nadu on a much larger scale because it's a 50% plus urbanized state. So as the character of states changes, instead of looking at cities as sources of financial resource for a state where to be spent elsewhere in the state, and that's the problem with most cities in India, they will become entities in themselves with some clout. I mean, take Karnataka, which a lot of people are referring to. I mean, Bangalore today has enough clout in the polity of Karnataka to make a difference.
Yes.
And then the problems of Bangalore will start getting attended to. You take a state like Andhra. Why did we pick Vizag? I'll tell you. It's a state which lost a capital. And they don't have a tier 1 city. So they have an ambition that we should have a tier 1 city, and they're willing to go the last mile, including governance, etc., to develop Vizag as a tier 1 city. So, you have to have those sudden windows of opportunity, but the overall trend, I think, is in getting better systems in place.
But to start with the point that you mentioned in your first reaction, that you can't let this process on its own, autonomously. Children don't grow up. They have to be educated. You need to put in that effort. So, do you think one of the answers is a NITI in every state, in the sense of a think tank, which will ensure ward level planning coming into city level planning? I mean, someone who actually gives that kind of a roadmap to emerging and emerged cities. Is that one solution?
Yeah. Okay. Two things. Not just me, the Prime Minister wants a NITI in every state. Okay. He not only wants that, he wants NITIs in the private sector, so that there are more think tanks which emerge. And that's one of the efforts one is putting into, that every area of work nurture half a dozen other people who can actually grow. We will partner with them. We are government. They will have more freedom to act rather than, the limits.
Both
we have.
very commendable ideas.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way forward, because end of the day, we will have our own constraints. I'm not talking constraints in the thought process, but in terms of government policies, government restrictions, in terms of our finances, etc. But you partner with others. So, NITI is currently an open place where people come and go. Coming to states, I mean, we have funded a large number of states. Over 10 states we are funding them from NITI. I have a representative of Karnataka who is sitting next to me, the deputy chair of the planning board. We have just sent them a check and a sanction order for setting up a NITI in Bangalore, an equivalent of that. And similar things are coming up in other parts of the country. It's totally bipartisan. I mean, everybody needs one, everybody needs to think forward. The other is converting NITI into an internal consultancy organization for governments. So, we'll go to states with a menu of options, of which urbanization is up front. It's probably among the top 3 things we need to. When we say we're going to touch 20 cities, there's no holy mantra about the 20. We pick up 20 of varying levels, and take Gujarat. If you're working with Surat, what they're doing is they're putting 10 of their officers attached to this team so that they learn it and they can replicate it across other cities. We will withdraw, then they carry it forward.
That sounds like a plan which perhaps more cities and more issues can use. Mr. Shisodia, in Rainmatter itself, you have a lot of attention and affection for the idea of environment and climate change. Is there anything specific that you would like to see either from NITI or from the municipal corporations themselves? It doesn't seem to be an issue which is suo moto getting attention. It is more thrust on us when we suddenly see cities flooding or getting exposed to the elements. So is there something that you think we should do before things get out of hand?
Lots of things. I think 2022 and 2023 across the world have proven that this is not a problem in the future. It is here and now. We've seen some horrific examples across the world. And this is like Srikanth was saying, the city systems need to account for it in every facet. Whether it's construction, whether it's our city planning, whether we're looking at health parameters, whatever our solutions are, you have to baseline it on what the climate impact is. Because, for instance, microplastics...
But do you see enough sensitivity to that issue at all?
If I were to be honest, not yet. Right? This is what we are trying to push. We need a consensus around it. We have looked at the city as an economic engine alone, but it's also a place where people live. It has a very large and complex relationship with a large hinterland. For instance, if Bangalore goes EV tomorrow morning, Raichur will choke to death because that's where our power comes from. So you need to understand the cascaded effects of your actions, what today we do not frame the ideas of progress around a city, improvements around a city along these multiple dimensions, along the idea of, I was glad to hear that we're looking at water security and stuff like that. But for instance, scope 2, scope 3, materials and energy is not part of the conversation in a big way. We do not account for the city's responsibility towards its neighbors as yet. And this city is not only, Srikanth will disagree with my framing of this, the city is not only cornering 70% of the GDP, it is also a very large contributor to, directly and indirectly, to the emissions problem, to the biodiversity problem, directly and indirectly. So the city has to start to take a, because the city sets the aspiration, right? And we cannot thrust the imagination we have of our tier 1 cities today on the small towns. There are 25,000 villages which have some urban characteristics across the country already, right? We can't really thrust our current imagination of city spaces on them. We have to start imagining alternatives to this. And it has to account for quality of life, for resilience along natural parameters, for what you discharge downstream, whether it's your airshed or watershed, right? The responsibility towards, the migrant problem is actually a village problem that shows up in the city.
Yes.
Right? So what responsibility does the city take in where the migrants are coming from, right? In terms of equitable payment, in terms of decentralized, like I said, there could be 10,000 urban centers, all economic engines or cultural centers or what have you in their own right. So I think we have to expand our imagination quite dramatically, and the ecology, the climate problem has to be at the core of it, or, it's already sliding down very, very rapidly.
Yeah, every city is a product of migrants. So there's no running away from that. I guess that defines the problem. Vidya, you're widely traveled, and EdelGive in its own right would have a lot of knowledge about cities abroad as well. Is there anything that we can cut paste in terms of even an instance? I'm trying to look for inspiration over here. So something that you observed and you think that that's not all that difficult to replicate.
Actually, many years ago, as part of a small group of people who were really looking at leadership through a very different lens, a bunch of us were delegated to go and see Manchester, which was a very interesting trip. This was probably actually almost 10 years ago. A city that lay to ruin post, particularly in the 70s and the 80s. The textile industry there, which was, if you remember, the bane of a lot of Indians during our freedom struggle, lay in ruins. There was no economy to speak of. Crime was rampant. It seemed as if people wrote off a great city that was really that saw the birth of the Industrial Revolution. I think there was work done at a leadership level, very interestingly, by a very disparate group of stakeholders. And over 20 years, Manchester has seen a reversal. Now, who are these leaders? These were not just governments and city leaders, elected leaders, the mayor, but it was also religious leaders. It was, employment and businesses. And just like I think the minister and Mr. Subrahmanyam also spoke about earlier, the university system. So Manchester reimagined itself as a place that should attract the young, and actively sought out, inviting a world-class university. And today the University of Manchester really rates itself very highly among universities, certainly in Europe. Secondly, I think it became a tech hub. A large part of it was born out of the university.
It rediscovered a new...
It rediscovered. At that time, the UK was also actively involved in resettling refugees coming from Africa, and they continue to do that. There was an active program that the city did to show itself in good light in terms of welcoming and assimilating these refugees. And finally, the role of religion, because there were, we met Sufi and Islamic communities, we met the church leaders, we met temple leaders, because it really became a hub of a very diverse population that suddenly found meaning in living in Manchester and calling themselves Mancunians. So I think, in a sense, it is possible if there is enlightened leadership that is not, like...
Across groups.
It's across groups. And in a sense, it speaks again to the citizenship point that I was trying to make earlier, that we ourselves will need to be, I think we'll have to see structural shifts in the way we want our cities to be. It's not just going to be, let's think about the climate, let's think about our roads, let's think about the metro system. It has to be very much in line with what Mr. Subrahmanyam said earlier, is it has to be a holistic development which sees the involvement of everybody who makes the city such an incredibly alive place.
No, I completely agree with you. In fact, since you said Manchester, I don't know if you have also been to Glasgow. It is an example of citizen partnership. I mean, you just see banners everywhere saying Glasgow loves people. The way in which the central square where, the Duke of Wellington's statue on horseback, which is always, there is a traffic cone on it, a sense of humor of the Glasgowians. It's amazing how much citizen partnership can alter a city and actually not just improve it, but make it cheerful. A city with a sense of humor. That's exactly what I was looking for. Examples which we can cut and paste. And let me strike a personal note over here. As a Mumbaikar, all my life, born there, schooled there, university, married, and I'm sure I'm going to retire there. For all these years, 50 years, I have seen Mumbai come to its knees at least 1 or 2 days in monsoon because King Circle, Lower Parel, Baikala all get flooded. This year, King Circle and Lower Parel did not get flooded because the municipal commissioner was active. I mean, we have, before the monsoons arrived, there were gutters, some kind of a new gutter system, a drainage system, across the entire length and breadth of King Circle and Lower Parel. So the drainage simply improved. Of course, if there was a high tide, we would still have suffered, but much less than we would have in other areas, in other times. So I think glorious stories or good stories are not celebrated enough. And I would urge Janaagraha and its organs to have a daily digital output in terms of success stories, or weekly to start with. Something which you can cut paste. So that question to you again, Srikanth. What would you like to see as top 3 priorities? I know your 10 asks, but something in terms of either from the citizens' angle or from policymakers' angle, which can be implementable.
I've thought about 2. Let me see whether I come up with the 3 in the meantime. The first one would be that we move away from a one-size-fits-all approach. So today, we've mentioned it in the report, I'll repeat it. We have 8 mega cities, which are large global level economic powerhouses.
10 million
There are
plus.
mega cities. No, they're 4 million plus. You have close to 40 cities, I'm approximating them in terms of number, between 1 and 4 million. They're also very large. They're by global standards, they're already mega, but by Indian standards, they're next tier. Then you have the next tier of cities between 500,000 to a million. Then you have 1 lakh to 5 lakhs, and then you have below 1 lakh. And there's a very clear pattern that emerges. So you only have about 80 odd cities which have a population of more than 500,000, 500,000. Then you have about close to 500 cities which have a population of more than 1 lakh. Only 500. You then have 4,000 plus cities with a population of less than 1 lakh.
And
So India has they are cities as in, they are municipalities, they are town
Urban
panchayats,
conglomerate.
they are urban centers. They are governed as urban centers by state municipal acts. Currently, and I'm going to focus a lot more on the state, because I feel in India we don't adequately recognize the fact in these conversations that each state of India is like a country. in terms of size, in terms of scale, in terms of heterogeneity, adaptation to context. And
cultural units.
you could extend this by, I mean, there are 700 districts, so the variation is even more. But staying for a moment at the state level, because local governments are a state subject. I feel transformative reforms in India can happen with state leadership. I think because the union has, I'm not saying the union doesn't have to do anything. Obviously, thought leadership, funding allocations, innovations, performance-linked incentives, and looking at strategic areas like growth hubs, etc., will happen from the union government. But if you need to see transformation of city systems, it will have to be state-led, but adapted to city size, city type. That's one. Second, we need to move away from a dichotomous urban-rural paradigm, right? Which is important for us to think about carbon footprint, which is important for us to think about migrations, etc. Today, an urban center in Kerala will have more in common in terms of governance systems with an urban center in Rajasthan than with a village which is just next to it. So the dichotomous urban-rural, and our study reveals that India is one of the only countries to have that. So like Mr. Subrahmanyam said, some of this is the legacy of the past. And some states are beginning to reinvent themselves, like we've heard the example of Kerala, which has merged their urban and rural departments at the state level, creating a unified ministry for local self-governments, and even departments have been unified. And at district level, they're creating joint directorates. So this is my second point, which is reimagine the urban-rural dichotomy. Don't think in terms of places and people and interrelationships in terms of trade and services and relationships. The third thing I want to say is partnerships. I think India has a severe state capacities problem, both in terms of financial and human resources. We cannot place the onus of human development on governments alone. Success, Dr. Lahiri is here, the 15th Finance Commission also states India has a shortage of development capital. We'll overcome it in stages, but that's the reality today. Even advanced economies in the West have realized that 21st century challenges cannot be solved by governments alone, which is why they are speaking in the language of horizontal decentralization and not just vertical decentralization. So the traditional language of decentralization is power needs to get devolved from the union or the federal to the state or province and then to the local government. But many of the advanced economies who don't necessarily have a problem of state capacities are now devolving that power to business, to academia, to civil society, and forming partnerships which are place and people based. So many of the stories, in fact, even in UK, they have the model of local enterprise partnerships. They have combined authorities and city deals where all of these people have to work together. And these examples currently do exist in India in different cities in slightly different forms and shapes. And Mr. Subrahmanyam referred to NITI even in the private sector, right? We need constructive partnerships between government, business, civil society, and academia. The traditional Western model of people outside of government only holding up a mirror to the government for diagnosing the ills and expecting that we have adequate state capacities to fix them does not work in the Indian context. And we've seen that when the union and states, and we can see a remarkable difference in the last 10 years, across political party lines, across union and state governments. State after state is waking up to the urban demands. We are seeing more and more political leaders making urban a political agenda, making it politically salient, and they are willing to work with partners. So we have to stitch together these three partnerships. So I'd say one is adapt by city size and city type. Second is move away from the urban-rural dichotomy. And the third is stitch together constructive partnerships which are place-based.
Well, that's most useful, I must say. But I'll give it to Mr. Subrahmanyam to wrap up. As you correctly pointed out, the urban theme will work its way, will barge into the national priorities. It won't wait. And as what Srikanth has said, it has already come into the agenda. It's woken us all up. Do you see encouraging examples at the state? Because ultimately, center doesn't have feet on the ground. It is states which have feet on the ground. I guess you also would have done much more constructive work in all your state responsibilities, Mr. Subrahmanyam. Yeah, so good. Do you see that happening?
Yeah, so I've heard a lot of powerful points made here. So let me just repeat them for emphasis sake. I think fundamentally urban reform will have to be driven at the state level. Government of India can at best incentivize, nudge them in the right direction. So I think it's for states to wake up, and I think a lot of states are waking up.
Are you seeing signs?
Yeah, that's it. So the states are doing it. May not be everywhere and not at the same place everywhere. But I think the movement is there. It's also because, as I said, the changing demographics of the state and the power structures at states are actually facilitative. The second thing, the rural-urban divide is something which is there. The Prime Minister has been talking about it, urban, as he calls it, urban, you know. So urban, I mean, when planning for Mumbai, we're planning at a radius of about 100 kilometers. A lot of it is rural. It will continue to be rural. So actually, urban growth will also pick up agricultural growth. I mean, the most prosperous agricultural areas of UP are actually the ones adjoining Delhi, even the agricultural part, you know. So it can happen. So that's the second thing. The other point is, you know, I don't know how close we are to these kind of situations, Manchester, Glasgow, etc. I mean, cities do die. And that's something we must always remember. Now, whether they'll go back or not depends on a whole host of circumstances. I mean, a good example which has not gone back is Detroit, a top 5 city in the US in 1900. It's a dead city. What remains are the academic institutions. So you have Michigan, Ann Arbor, or whatever. That's the only thing left. So actually, we have to realize that if you don't attend to cities, they can die because other places grow. And the other is, going back, if you don't address the economic angle early on, and when I actually went and spoke to the...
sudden death.
No, A, sudden death. B, unplanned growth. I mean, and when I talk about economic hubs, you know, the example the Prime Minister gives, they look at Tirupur. Nobody planned for Tirupur, but it's actually an economic city. It grew to meet a demand for economic needs. And there are places across the Yamuna in Delhi, Gandhi Nagar, whatever, which is India's largest textile hub, with 10,000 shops making textiles. There's nothing. It's an urban slum in many ways. It could be Dharavi is an economic hub actually in some ways, but unplanned. So the point is we need to plan the economic part too. And when you plan, you are looking at endowments in the city, and endowments are multifarious. It's not just bright infrastructure. Infrastructure is also about parks, open spaces. It's also about, as I said, universities. I mean, there's a University of Tokyo, there's a University of London, there's a University, Columbia. Do our cities have that? Do Bangalore have anything? Do Hyderabad have anything? So we need to plan. The spaces exist for all those. I mean, Mumbai University has so much land which is idle, which could become a world-class university in the heart of a city, which can drive the growth of the city. And the other point, is Mumbai threatened? Let me tell you, people in Mumbai may not realize it. A gift city is a threat to Mumbai. Let me be very clear. The diamond bourse which has come up in Surat is a threat to Mumbai's diamond bourse. So luckily because India is a large country and we are run as a very federal entity with states being very powerful, every state is snapping at the feet of other states. So there's always effort, so everybody needs to be alive. But collectively, I think the nation is growing, and if you take the right steps, and managing urban areas is important, managing in terms of what we plan for them for the future, getting the systems in place, and systems you would call it governance or the entire whole space. And 3, the important point which I mentioned is partnerships. And I think again states are waking up. And buy-in from the states is very important. So when we start the growth hubs, we had it a compulsory, have the chief minister on board. Because if they don't do it, the rest of the things don't happen. Then it will be just a nice report, the innumerable report for every city lying on tables unacted upon. We are hopeful, we are trying to waken people up to new possibilities. And I think in a country which is headed for another 25 years of good growth, I think possibilities are immense.
On that encouraging note, thank you very much, Mr. Shisodia, Srikanth, Mr. Subrahmanyam, and Vidya. It's been an extremely enlightening and inspiring conversation. We do hope we can pick up the threads and see more such activity, but I would once again urge that media can do a lot. So setting up a medium and digitally conveying probably every week or every month through a monthly, rather than wait for your annual output. Janaagraha.
Thank you for delegating functions to us.
No, you'll are better at it. And I think since all of you spoke about university towns and the importance of academic participation, perhaps a start could be made in including town planning as a course in at least management colleges, if not in regular arts and science colleges. Perhaps that would attract the best minds and, liaise with commercial interests so that it is picked up and becomes one of the, centers of citizen state and business activity. Let's hope this is a start of more inspiring and more constructive building up of Indian cities. Thank you very much.